Hi there, welcome to my channel. My name is Carmen and I am basically just someone who likes to make her own clothes and likes to show you how to do it too. So in today's video, I am going to be attempting some Sashiko style mending. So it's basically a type of visible mending that I've been seeing out there a lot lately, and I think it looks really cool. So I'm going to give that a try today on a pair of jeans that I have that have a hole in the bum area, so I can't really wear them out the way they are right now. So I'm going to be attempting to mend these jeans with some Sashiko style mending. So let's get started. Okay, so these are the jeans that I want to mend. And specifically, it's this hole right here below the pocket because it shows kind of a lot of bum, which I don't know. I mean, I don't mind wearing it out, but I think I prefer to have it mended so that I can wear it to work and things. So yeah, I'm gonna try to mend just that hole that is on the bum right there below that pocket. It's a pretty big hole. And then we'll see how that goes. Okay, so I found this tutorial, and I think this is the one that I'm going to follow for my jeans. And I picked this one because the hole that they were mending in this tutorial is pretty much the same exact hole that I have in my jeans, like right here below the back pocket. I think the hole on mine is a little bit bigger than the one here, but I think it's the closest that I could find, and I think it would be good to start with one where they're trying to fix the same kind of hole that I am trying to fix, because I wasn't sure how to deal with the pocket, so I think it'll be good to use a tutorial like this with the same kind of hole. So I'm going to go ahead and print this tutorial out so that I can have it next to me while I'm trying to patch my jeans. And yeah, so I'll see you at my sewing table once I get this all printed out and ready to go. Alright, so I'm at the sewing table and I've got my jeans here. I've also cut a patch out of another old pair of jeans that is large enough to cover the entire hole. And I also have some embroidery thread. I'm going to be using this light blue for the first step. And I'm going to be using embroidery thread and an embroidery needle. There are like actual Sashiko threads and needles, but I didn't have those and I didn't want to go buy them just for this. So I had some embroidery thread and embroidery needles sitting around from when I used to do a lot of embroidery. So I'm just going to be using that for today, and it worked pretty well. So if you have embroidery thread sitting around, then you can go ahead and give it a try. So now I'm just turning my jeans inside out so that I can put the patch over the hole on the inside. Now that everything is laying flat, I'm just going to put that patch over the hole, and I'm going to put it with the darker side, or what was the outside of the jeans that I cut the patch from, facing towards the outside. I don't know if that really matters, but that's what I did. So anyways, now I'm going to pin it in place with some safety pins, and I'm just pinning through the one layer of the jeans, just the back part of the jeans, because if you go through the front, then you won't be able to turn the jeans back right sides out so we can actually sew the patch down. And using the safety pins to pin this down was what they said to do in that tutorial that I printed out, and it worked super well. I really liked the idea because it held the patch in place, and you weren't getting stabbed by pins like you might have been with regular pins, especially when turning the jeans right side out again. I really liked the safety pins for that. So yeah, now I'm just pinning the patch in place with safety pins. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn the jeans right sides out again so that we can start sewing. All Alright, so now that the jeans are right sides out again, I'm going to grab my straight edge ruler and I'm going to draw a 1/4 inch grid across the entire area. So I'm basically just going to be drawing a large rectangle, making sure that it covers the entire area of where the hole is plus some. So I don't want it to be just like right on the edges of the hole because it seems like it wouldn't be that secure. So I think it's better to go wider around the hole, or at least that's what I did. And then I'm drawing just a 1/4 inch grid all the way across. So there's going to be just a series of 1/4 inch little squares in the grid. So I'm drawing horizontal lines all 1/4 inch away from each other, parallel lines down through that rectangle. And then I'm also going to be drawing in vertical lines parallel to each other 1/4 inch away from each other. So that will form a 1/4 inch grid. And for this, I am using Taylor's chalk because it washes out. So you can use chalk or some sort of invisible pen, like sewing pen, something that you know will wash out. So this grid is going to be basically the grid showing us where to sew so that we get nice even stitching. So I'm going to go ahead and finish drawing in this grid and then we'll go on to the next step. Alright, so here's my completed grid, so it's time to start sewing. So I've got my embroidery thread here and I am threading my needle. I decided to go with a double layer of thread, so I'm threading it through the needle so that there are 2 threads, one coming out from either side of the needle, and then I'm just going to tie a knot in the end of the 2 threads just to secure everything so that when I first start stitching, that knot will be up against the inside of the pants and will keep everything from pulling through. And I decided to go with a double layer of thread just because I thought it would be more secure and that it would make the thread stand out more since it would be thicker. But honestly, I don't really know if using a double layer was necessary. I don't really think that it was, and it used a lot of thread, so I think that next time I would just do a single layer, but it's totally up to you. So I have knotted my thread, and then I'm just going to trim off the thread tails and straighten everything out, make sure everything is even, and then I'm going to go ahead and start. So I'm going to push the needle up from the inside of the jeans, and I'm going to start in that lower left-hand corner of my grid. So I'm just going to push the needle up through that left side, lower corner of the grid, and then I'm going to pull the thread all the way through so that the knot is secure against the back of the jeans, and just wanting to make sure that everything is even on the inside and that there's no pieces of thread sticking through. So you really want to check and make sure that that knot is flat against the back of the jeans. So I'm going to go back down a 1/4 inch from where I came up, which would be the next line on my grid. And then I'm going to come up on the next line on my grid. So it's basically going to end up with a 1/4 inch stitch, a 1/4 inch skipped, a 1/4 inch stitch, a 1/4 inch skipped. So you go up, down a 1/4 inch from that, back up a 1/4 inch from that, back down a 1/4 inch from that, and so on. So right now I'm kind of struggling with my thread getting tangled, but I started to get the hang of it more later on. So I'm going to go ahead and continue down that bottom row, continuing making 1/4 inch stitches. So going down through my grid, back up along the next line of my grid, and so on, all the way along that bottom edge of my grid. Alright, so now that I've finished the bottom row of my stitching, I'm going to go ahead and do the next row up from that. Only this time, instead of bringing my needle up along the outside edge, I'm going to be bringing it up one row in from the outside of my grid. And the reason for this is so that the stitches will be offset. So basically, in the columns where there is a stitch on the bottom row, there will be no stitch on this next row up. And where there was no stitch on the bottom row, there will be a stitch on this row up. So it'll give it an offset look. So then on the next row up from this, I will start on the outside edge so that the stitches will be back to the same pattern as the bottom row. So it'll go every other row like that so that it's offset from the rows around it, so that it just gives it kind of a cool look rather than having the stitches all be in the same place on all the rows. They'll be kind of offset. So I'm going to go ahead and finish sewing the rest of this grid. It's all sewn in the same pattern all the way across the entire grid. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish that, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. All right, so here's what it looks like now that it's all sewn. Doesn't it look so cool? And everything is secured in place at this point. So here's what it looks like from the inside. My patch is all sewn down. Everything is secure. This hole is definitely not going to expand or get larger at all or continue ripping at this point because it's very much secured by all this stitching that I've done. But I decided I wanted to continue with the tutorial to do their next step where they covered the hole with a small patch. So I made this small patch just large enough to cover the hole. So it's just right along, it just barely covers the hole. And I've also ironed under the edges so that there's no raw edges on this patch. And I'm just going to go ahead and set it on top of the hole there and then secure it in place with some pins so that I can sew it down. So this portion, according to the tutorial I was following, is more just for looks, and it's actually been secured already, so you could stop before this step, but I just thought it looked super cool with this little patch covering the hole, so I decided to go ahead and do this step as well. So I'm securing the patch down with some pins to hold everything in place. So for this portion, I'm going to be using this cream colored embroidery thread, and I'm also going to be using just a single layer this time because, like I said, using the double layer used a lot of thread, and I actually didn't have any of that light blue colored thread left after doing the first step. So yeah, I'm going to be using this cream colored thread for this. So I'm threading my needle with this thread in a single layer, and then I'm just going to go ahead and tie a knot in the end so that it can be secured against the inside of the pants and keep the thread from pulling through. So next I'm just going to be using this thread and using a whip stitch to secure this patch in place. So I'm just going to use the whip stitch all the way around all four sides of this patch just to hold it in place. Alright, so the patch has been secured down with the whip stitch, and doesn't it look so cool? So anyways, my pins are out, the patch is secured down, and next I'm going to grab my straight edge ruler and I'm just going to draw in a 1/4 inch grid across this smaller patch the same way that I drew the 1/4 inch grid across the other patch, the larger patch in the first step. So my grid has been drawn, and I've also rethreaded my needle with that same cream colored thread, also a single layer of thread. And now what I'm going to do is just go across the grid horizontally first, just sewing a very tiny stitch at all the intersection points of the lines on the grid. So at every corner of the small squares on the grid, I'm just going to sew a small stitch about 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch wide. So I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way across the grid horizontally, going down through the grid, sewing a tiny stitch at each of the intersection points, each of the corners of the squares on the grid. All right, so now I've gone through all the horizontal lines of the grid and sewn a small stitch at all of the intersection points where the lines intersect with each other. And now I'm going to go ahead and do that same thing, only going vertically across the grid. So this is going to form little tiny X's or crosses where the two stitches overlap. So yeah, I'm doing the same thing I did before, only we're going across the vertical lines, sewing a tiny stitch at all the intersection points, going across the grid vertically rather than horizontally this time to form tiny little crosses where the two stitches intersect. All right, so it's all done now. I think it looks so cool. I'm so happy with how it turned out, and I think they look better than they did before. I really like how it turned out. And I love the contrast of the cream thread along that top patch and the blue thread underneath. I think that looks really cool too. So now I'm gonna go ahead and put these in the washing machine and to get that chalk out, and then I'll show you what it looks like when they come out. All right, so here's how they look on now that they're done. I absolutely love them. I think I finished sewing these about 2 or 3 weeks before editing this video, and I have been wearing them so much. I absolutely love them. So I hope that you enjoyed this video and maybe you'll give it a try. And like I said, I linked the tutorial that I used for this in the description, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.